Matt, Scott, Reuben, Elliot. Long ago, the four podcasters lived together in harmony. Then everything changed when the Australian nation attacked. Only the Doofcast, master of all four podcasters, could stop them. But when the world needed it most, it vanished. 100 years passed and we discovered the new Doofcast. Although its podcasting skills are great, it has a lot to learn before it's ready to save anyone. But I believe the Doofcast can save the world.
Hello and welcome to the Doofcast, the official variety podcast of doofmedia.com. My name is Scott Daly, and 70 years from now, I hope there's a giant statue of me in the middle of the bay.
And my name is Matt Freeman, and 70 years from now, I hope that there's still war zeppelins.
My name is Elliot Diebold, and 70 years from now, I hope people still buy my cabbages.
And my name is Reuben Morehouse, and I hope that 70 years from now, my two sons try to take over Sydney in their own special ways.
Okay, this week on the show, we are doing another one of our Patreon-produced episodes. For those of you that do not know, folks who pledge to us at the Doof Warrior level or above on Patreon get to select a topic for us to do a show on. This week, Patron Shelby has asked us to return to the world of Avatar and discuss Season 1 of The Legend of Korra.
And of course, we couldn't head back to Avatar without including our two favorite Australian bending buddies. So welcome back to the show, Elliot and Reuben from Media M.D.
Well, yep. Thanks for having us.
Good to be here. We're the pro-benders of this podcast, I guess.
Clearly.
So here's the confusion. When you say pro-benders, do you mean the professional sports benders or
Yes.
the people that are like pro-bending anti-humans?
Both.
Yeah.
Both.
Good.
Oh,
good.
I
Good.
see.
Good.
Okay.
Me too.
All right. So yes, this will be a full discussion of Season 1 of The Legend of Korra. That's all we're talking about this week. That's it. Nothing else. Just Korra for an hour and a half or so. And there will be full spoilers for Season 1. So if you haven't watched that show yet, go do that.
You won't regret it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Let's just jump right into it. And let's talk about the show. So Matt, why don't you give like a very brief overview of what the show is? What is The Legend of Korra?
Well, so there was the original Avatar, The Last Airbender TV show was 3 seasons of delightful Nickelodeon programming. This is the sequel show to that show. It follows a new Avatar who is the master of all 4 elements, or is going to be, I suppose, eventually. And this Avatar is an older character. It's a woman rather than a boy this time, and the whole show is basically aged up. The whole show, that this is more of a teenage show, whereas the other show was aimed more at kids, although it was still quite entertaining to everyone. I'm sure I've missed a lot of important details in my recap here. I'm kind of trying to give like a more meta level summary of it. What would you guys say about it other than that?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I definitely agree that it feels like, because this show came out like 4 or 5 years after Avatar: The Last Airbender finished, and it kind of seems like they're targeting the same people who were watching the original. They've gone from targeting 8 to 10-year-olds to teenagers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels right to me.
Yeah, I agree with that. So I think for Matt, just like with Avatar, I think for Matt and I, we both watched the show for the first time for this podcast, but both you and Reuben Elliot had seen the show before, right? All the way through. So you've seen all seasons of this.
Yes, multiple times.
I watched it as it was coming out, and I've never rewatched any of it. So for me, it was quite interesting sort of reevaluating opinions that I've been stating that I've had, despite having not watched most of it for like 6 or 7 years. So it's cool. Been really fun to revisit something that I've never watched twice and see it, more completely.
Cool. How about you, Reuben? Did you watch it as it was coming out?
Yes, and then I did a rewatch maybe a year after that, and then I haven't watched it again since. But yeah, like Elliot said, actually my opinions on it have kind of significantly changed in the 5 years that it's been since I watched it for the first time.
I hope we're able to get into that today. That'll be fun to talk about, or
Yes.
if in a non post season 1 spoiler way.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. All right, so let's go around the digital table and just talk about our overall thoughts on the show before we dive into it and really start to dissect and discuss the different parts of it we liked and maybe the parts we didn't like so much. So, Matt, why don't you go first? Overall, what was your opinion on season 1 of The Legend of Korra?
Yeah, so my viewing experience was actually, I started watching season of Korra almost immediately after we did our podcast on Avatar: The Last Airbender season 3, because my friend Shelby made it clear that was what she was going to make us watch. And
Thanks, Shelby.
so I started watching it, and I like, my immediate feeling was, this ain't Avatar: The Last Airbender. Where's Aang? And then I watched a bunch of episodes, and then I stopped, and then I came back to it within the last week and finished, and then my feeling about it was much more positive, actually. And that was kind of interesting, just watching it in that close proximity to Avatar: The Last Airbender. I was constantly judging it against the first show, and then having had some space, I was able to kind of just take it on its own merits and had a much more positive impression of the latter half of the show. And I don't think that was necessarily because the show gets better in the second half. I think I literally think it was just the shadow of the first show. So overall, I think I came out with a positive opinion. I feel like if I had finished the show in that first stretch, I might have come out with a negative opinion, and I think that's interesting in a very meta way.
Yeah.
That's my first impressions anyway.
It's a bit of a horrifying legacy to try and live up to, right? Like, The Last Airbender is a show that is simple enough in its premise and executed so well that basically trying to do that again is just a recipe for a failure. And so this show does try to, it's aimed at an older audience. It tries to tackle things that are a bit more complicated. And I can't imagine being the showrunners of this show and trying to get back into a universe that you love so much, that is loved by so many, and trying to not just let people down. It feels like it would be a nightmare.
Yeah.
And I think the decision to try and do something quite different was probably the right call. It's going to be the sort of thing that always gets a more mixed response, because you're going to have to pick and choose sort of bits of the world, and that's going to, it depends on what people connected with in the original show as to whether they're going to be okay with that. But to try and just follow on from what The Last Airbender did would probably have been suicide, because you couldn't top it, I don't think.
Yeah. I mean, I think they basically told I don't know if the perfect is the word, but an almost perfect story in that setting. And to go back to that setting, you're going to have to tell a very different story, which they do. So ultimately, I'm pretty happy with the overall story. And I think what they're trying to do with the show is interesting. I think it's interesting because I think just from we haven't really talked about this much, but it seems like Scott at least has some very specific ideas about where he wanted the show to go that it didn't go, and I didn't have specific ideas so much as I was just like, yeah, I guess that concluded okay. It did. This is season 1. You don't expect like the epic showdown conclusion. You just expect it to have a solid ending, and I was like, yeah, okay, that was all right. So.
Yeah, I guess I can go next then. That's a good transition to my overall thoughts. I think I'm on the same page as you, Matt, where I quite enjoyed this thing. I did not watch it right away. It had been a while, so I actually found myself getting into this thing. I think we even talked about it on the last time all 4 of us were together talking about Avatar. We talked about Korra briefly and the realization that, if it's about an Avatar, then Aang must be dead. So I knew this going into the show, and it's still like... It still hit me when the show started, and it's like, oh yeah, Aang's gone. He's dead. This is not going to be about him at all. That still was really emotional for me, even though I knew that was coming. Mm-hmm. And the first few episodes I really, really enjoyed because I loved everything they were setting up. Like we moved to this new location. We moved to Republic City, which is like in the 70 years since the last one, everything's a little bit more modern. It's much closer to like 1920s New York City ish look, and that was really interesting to me. My complaints are not that like here's where I wish the show had gone, but rather here's what I thought the show was setting up where it was going, and just feeling like it didn't live up to the things that it set up. And yeah, we're going to have conversations about every single one of those things, I think, throughout this conversation. But yeah, I mean, like I ended this show and this season thinking this was really good, but not great. And it's a weird criticism, because like I don't want to make it seem like this is a bad show. It's not. But especially compared to Avatar, when you're looking at the mountain that is Avatar, I'm just like, it's like a hill. It's like a decent hill.
I think, yeah, to sort of go from there, like my summary would sort of be Korra starts to tackle much more complex and interesting ideas. And then I think because it's still not trying to be a super adult show, it doesn't quite stick the landing with some of them. Like it doesn't make as big a statement or anything as I think it could. And that's where it falls a little bit flatter to me, in that they start to tackle bigger and more interesting things and don't stick the landing quite as well as the original show did.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't know if they're just up to it, to the type of show they wanted to make, to actually like tackle the complex ideas that they're trying to tackle in this thing. And that's like, okay, like it's still a show for kids, right? But I mean, I don't know. I just think if you're gonna start walking down this path, you better have a plan to how you're gonna approach this stuff. And at times it didn't feel like they had a plan, or if they did, it felt like the plan was abandoned. I have a lot of things to say about how the season ends. It felt very, very weird to me, the rushed nature of the ending. Like I felt like they were setting up a really interesting direction for the show to go, and then in the last 30 seconds they just completely curved back the other way, and that was very surprising to me. But I don't know, like we're gonna talk about all these things as we go, but that's my overall thought, is that it's like I see where you're going with this, I'm into it, I'm excited about it, and then I feel like you just didn't quite get there.
Yeah, I mean, you don't get to say this very much in 2019 about TV, and obviously there's more to come, so it's not the end, but like I feel like this show could have used more episodes.
Yeah, that is a crazy thing to say, but I kind of agree with you.
My overall opinion of it, I think, is I enjoyed it a lot more than I expected to. And so obviously this is from the context of having seen 4 seasons of this show, without going into any spoilers, obviously. But the show really goes in some very interesting places, and to me, I always saw this season as kind of like, yeah, it's the first season, it's it's okay, it does well enough. But actually coming back into it, I was really floored by some of the stuff in it and how much it affected me on an emotional level. So I actually came in with medium expectations, and they were quite exceeded, I think.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I guess I don't know if we're just putting out all of our general feelings and also comments on how it didn't live up to The Last Airbender up front, so that we can get it out of the way. I feel like I kind of agree with what everyone else has said, and I also feel like if the characters in this show had been as strong as the characters in The Last Airbender, or set aside the comparison, just say if the characters in this show had been strong, then I think we would be able to, we'd all be forgiving a lot of the complaints that we have. Like you tackle big ideas that you don't quite stick the landing. I don't really mind if the characters are awesome and I was really engaged in their story, but I'm sitting here and I can't remember the names of several of the main characters of the show that I just finished watching. That's a big problem, and it's not because I wasn't paying attention. Like I just, it's like, my brain didn't store that information, because that's not a character in the same way that like Katara is a character in my head,
Yeah,
Sure.
I agree with that. I mean, I think if you look at the trinity of characters in this show, or at least in the first season of the show, it's Korra, Mako, and Bolin, right? Mm-hmm. And guess which one of those 3 I like?
Yeah,
just Korra.
Yeah.
Like I am utterly uninterested in Mako and Bolin as characters. I don't think they're well fleshed out. I don't think they're that particularly interesting of people. And like I like the thing about Katara and Sokka is I felt like, even though they didn't start out like super complex characters, I felt like they took an archetype as a starting point and then fleshed it out from there. And I felt like Mako and Bolin are just there. Like I don't really understand what they want outside of very surface level stuff. Like I don't see a journey for them really at all, outside of just like a kind of forced romance plot that I didn't ever really buy. And that I totally agree with you, Matt, that if these two characters were great characters, I would totally be less willing to talk about the parts that didn't work for me.
I'm going to play devil's advocate a bit here and say that I agree that Katara and Sokka are better characters than Mako and Bolin for sure. But to kind of compare, in the 11 or 12 episodes of Legend of Korra season 1, if we were in Avatar: The Last Airbender, the episode we'd be up to at this point is The Great Divide, which is, I think, a good example of
the best episode of season 1.
Well, sure, it's I think it works as an example of how Sokka and Katara's characters didn't mature that quickly, right? And not to say that Mako and Bolin become more interesting later. I'm not going to say that because I don't think that's true. But I do think the time that they are given to grow is not that much. And maybe next to that, I actually think some of the other characters, Korra, Tenzin, Asami, and maybe even Lin, are kind of stronger than their The Last Airbender counterparts.
I agree that Korra is a good character and Tenzin is a good
love
character.
Korra.
Yeah. I'm not. Yeah, I wouldn't argue with that at all.
Here's how I feel about Korra, and this might be controversial. I love her as a character. I loved what they set up with her. I think the show kind of abandons her as a character in the second half, what it wants to do with her. Like this central idea to me of this airbender freaking loves being the this avatar loves being the avatar. They're all about it. But they are missing the spiritual connection, the spiritual side of the whole thing. They just are on the physical kick-ass side. I thought that was really interesting, a really neat thing to explore. And I just feel like the show doesn't really ever explore it. Like one of the things I hate about the end of the season is like the moment where Aang appears is powerful. And then he's just like, you've done it. And I was, wait, what? She did? When? When did she?
Yeah.
And it's just like, well, you've reached your lowest point, and therefore you are connected to the spirit world again. I'm like, no, like that. Like, I think season 2 being a whole season about her trying to get that connection back, only having airbending, would have been a fascinating thing to do. And maybe not the whole season, but at least more than like 5 minutes at the end of a season, where they could actually explore this idea and explore what it is like being this character who was so into being the avatar and has had that taken away from her. Explore that. And it's just like, nope, just kidding. We're done.
It actually seems like an obvious setup of like, oh yeah, now she's going to learn how to airbend really well because it's the only thing she can use. And then it's like, no. No.
Well, and especially because like you could do so much more with that, like, because the whole world would be sort of have lost the avatar, and obviously the one thing she does sort of struggle with in her role as the avatar is the weight on her shoulders there. So yeah, I agree. Like having her actually have a journey to connect with the spiritual side or even the airbending side. I would actually extend the criticism you just made, Scott, to the bit where she unlocks her airbending.
Yeah.
After Amon takes the other 3, like I think that could have been maybe with even just a few lines beforehand, sort of better set up and explained, and then she sort of gets her airbending and she has to go through this actual journey to sort of get back to where she was. It definitely kind of feels like they just sort of rushed it to sort of have an ending.
Yeah, that was downright weird actually, because like the whole idea of airbending was supposed to be like, yeah, you got to go with the flow and you got to relax, and you're not relaxed. And like the moment where she finally airbends is like the opposite of all of the things they were always telling her she needed to do.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, I guess it didn't matter. Actually.
If that moment felt like more earned and more triumphant, like everything would have clicked for me, I feel like, but it just didn't. And like, it's so weird to me that she has this entire conversation with Mako at the end, that is like, no, you have to go back to the city. Like I can't be with you because I don't even know what I am anymore. And it's this whole conversation. And then 20 seconds later, it's just like, JK, let's
do
be
it.
in love again.
Yeah.
It's
Aang
just
fixed
so
it.
weird.
Yeah,
It feels like two
I
different
agree.
shows. It really does.
Well, no, it feels like they cut out the 6 episodes in between those two moments.
Right.
It does feel like they sent this episode to Nickelodeon and they were like, no, you can't end the season this way.
Yeah.
You know, and they had to make it a happy ending or something. I wish that it's funny that this didn't bother me as much as it seems to have bothered you, but like now I wish that we had looked it up and seen if there was some kind of conflict over the way the season ended, because it is downright weird, actually.
Yeah. Well, Elliot Reuben, maybe you know this.
Yeah.
I know a bit about the production stuff behind Korra, and I don't want to get into it sort of too much because I really like the way the Doofcast just tries to analyze the product. But I will say that there was some Nickelodeon interference with sort of some of the ending. Like one funny example is in the finale when there's all the planes and stuff, and every time one gets shot down, there's like a special shot of a parachute coming out. That was actually because I think in the original version of the episode they didn't have that, and Nickelodeon was sort of like, no, you can't have people dying like that. So that's why just about every shot has just like a parachute somewhere in the background that's kind of added in.
That's hilarious. I definitely noticed that. I definitely was like, I wonder if this is a studio mandate, because they seem to be taking specific time to show the parachute guy.
Yeah, no one in this war died. Don't worry.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Yeah, I know that this show did have an interesting relationship with Nickelodeon, because it was, I think Nickelodeon expected it to be for the same age range as The Last Airbender, whereas obviously trying to be a bit more adult, to the extent that I think it was halfway through season 4 that they moved it to a much later time slot, and finally were like, okay, now you can just do the things you want to do, but it took a while to get there.
I think season 3 was the one they moved it to a later time slot.
Okay.
4 is the one where they just moved it to online only. They didn't even keep airing it.
What?
Oh man,
That's crazy.
Yeah, but it's a blessing in disguise, because it really did let things go. Well, I won't say anything, but some good stuff in there.
Yeah, that's okay. That I am looking forward to later seasons a little bit more then.
But so just to sort of jump back to the Avatar Last Airbender versus Korra comparisons, just while we're on there, alongside Korra and Aang, like I do, as you touched on, I like how Korra's kind of set up as the opposite of Aang in terms of being the Avatar, and I think the way the show sets her up as kind of in Aang's shadow, and it does this to Tenzin as well. Like the opening cinematic is basically just her kind of standing alongside the giant statue of Aang, and I think that really perfectly encapsulates what they start doing with her in the first half of the season, which is setting her up as someone who has really big shoes to fill, and I almost feel like we end up getting more of that angle from Tenzin, but it's such an interesting angle and such a smart idea to do when you're following up such a big show, is to literally have your character be someone who is trying to fill in the shoes of this really big thing you're trying to follow as well.
yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, he literally saved the whole world, united everyone together, built this utopia city, and is honored with the Statue of Liberty in the middle of their New York City bay. Like it is massive and huge, and I completely agree that the show does not blink at that. Like, it totally allows that reality to be part of what the show is.
Yeah, I mean, also it's a statue of him when he's 12, right? So like, it's impossible to live up to. I like that. Like, Aang is this pacifist, and not that he doesn't fight when he has to, but like Korra, even from the very beginning of the show, her whole approach, like one of the first things she does is just like tear up like an entire downtown street with earthbending. And you're just like, people have to drive on that street, Korra. and she's just so, I mean, basically callous. She starts out being a callous and very aggressive person. And that's kind of, I don't know, I guess part of the arc of the season is her getting a little bit more mellow and more complicated in her sense of right and wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I loved Republic City. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the concept of this setting that we have put the entire first season of the show in, basically. it's really fascinating to me because Avatar was always a show that like there was definitely technology happening, but it was never to this level. And like you can kind of see what 70 years of prosperity has done to the world. It's modernized. There are skyscrapers in this city. There are cars now. They're
Satomobiles, Scott. They're not cars.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Apologies. And I like that one of the things the show seems to be doing, especially with what you were just talking about, Matt, is this idea of what is the place of the Avatar in a world that is modernized to the way it has. And one of the things that I think it also is exploring, what is the place of bending itself in a world that is technologically advanced enough to where maybe we don't need you guys as much anymore. And that is one thing that I think the show sets up really well. And then we move into our whole plot with the Equalists. And that I think is the most disappointing thing for me, is that it just doesn't ever really want to look at this idea in any more detail than just what I just talked about.
Is that see, that's interesting, because I think my feeling was almost like, oh, I guess this will be a continuing thing, like
that, and that is very possible. Yeah, I don't want to say no to that.
But I mean, I'm actually, I have only seen the first season. I have no idea what else happens, but like I'm leaning toward you being right, because they did kill the Equalist leadership. I guess there's maybe a few other Equalist dudes hanging in the wings. I know Elliot and Reuben can't say anything right now, but
we're
like,
staying completely silent.
But like the feeling of it for me was like, this has gotta keep going, otherwise it will feel pretty unfulfilling, because like clearly, I mean, just to kind of lay it out in very literal terms, like the last show dealt with bending trying to wipe like a continent off the earth, and like bending is this super powerful thing.
Yeah.
And in this show, it's like a bender can barely hold their own against one or two people with modern military technology.
Yeah.
And that, like, it's they have made the great equalizer in terms of military technology, and that's yeah, I don't know. Definitely, you can't back up from that, right? Like, the subsequent seasons at least have to have this idea that a guy with a shock glove or a you know a bi-wing airplane is pretty dangerous relative to somebody who can make water move around. So yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna stop talking now.
Well, I mean, I think that's what's particularly fascinating to me about the whole equalist movement is, like, I kind of agree with them. Like, I mean, Amon does some stuff that, like, I'm kind of not thrilled about, but there's so, like, you know, in, I think it's the first episode, Korra meets that guy kind of, you know, proclaming for the equalists on the side of the street, and she just kind of try to overpower him with bending and like scare him, and she just proves him right.
Yeah.
And that sets this tone for me the rest of the season, where it's like, okay, like, I know what Amon's not doing here isn't great, but nobody in the bending circles ever addresses that maybe he kind of has a point.
Right. I mean, the name of their organization is the Equalists. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Like, I mean, that, like, equality is good. and yes, I mean, absolutely, Amon, like, it took this concept and has corrupted it to its core and is using it to gain power and to be a jackass, 100%. But yeah, I think seeing the show like actually deal with the consequences of the movement that he stirred, because if the people weren't actually feeling this way, he wouldn't have had any power over them. It's because he was tapping into something that people actually genuinely felt that he was able to gain power. And I wish it would have just touched on that. And it doesn't have to be like, I don't, this is not like a super, super complex show that needs to like really dive into like these class or race relations or whatever you want to call it. But just to approach it in any kind of way, like the ruling class of the city are benders. Every member of the council is a bender. Maybe like end the show with putting a representative of non-bending on the council or something. I don't know. Like, just acknowledge that, hey, this guy was bad, but maybe there is a point, especially in this modern world we live in, that rule through bending doesn't make as much sense as it used to.
Yeah. I'm taking from the silence of our co-hosts that, perhaps there is something like this. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think it's a really fascinating idea. Just the fact that Eamon took over this movement, because that's what always happens, right? Like what always happens in Earth history, real history, is you have a movement that seems pretty good. Like the things they're saying sound pretty good. Maybe you can pick holes in it, but the people who are at who sort of planned it, at least, they generally have their heart in the right place. And then some psychopath comes along and hijacks it and says all the right things, takes control, and then just uses it for their own personal power. That's what happens, like literally every time. So the fact that this happened in the show, I'm like, oh, that's awesome. Like they're going to explore these themes of like how movements are co-opted and used for bad purposes, and how it's very difficult actually to have a popular movement work, without, and they don't explicitly talk about it. And I'm kind of fine with that, because I do give them some like leeway as it being like a show for teens. Like, what are you going to do? You're going to have like a boardroom episode where everyone's like talking about the like Star Trek, conference room episode. But like, the fact that they did that actually is a cool idea. I actually like that.
Yeah, and I think to their credit, I think they're much more interested in exploring that part of it, the idea of watching a movement be corrupted by a power-hungry evil dude. They're definitely interested in exploring that part of the whole thing. They just leave the rest of it kind of just there. And yeah, if later seasons explore this in different ways, I will completely roll back everything I've just said. But yeah, I was very surprised, because like I immediately, like you can see from the first episode what you guys said, right in that first moment where she's encounters the equalist guy who she bullies, you're like, oh, I know what they're doing now. I can see what they're doing. Look, there's this modernized city. People aren't, clearly bending is not as important as it used to be. The world has changed, and now we're Korra, this gung-ho avatar, now up against a world that maybe isn't as into her as it used to be.
And she's basically coded as being like a hick for the first few episodes, right? Like she comes in from the Northern Waste. She doesn't know how to do anything. She doesn't understand money, and so it did surprise me that they didn't play on that more. I guess she doesn't have as much of a Korra becomes streetwise arc as I thought they would. But that's not a criticism, more of a that wasn't the plot that I expected them to do. But I don't blame them, because it's like it was already pretty full of plot. I was okay with that. I actually thought toward the beginning of the show, I was like, oh, so this first season is going to be like a sports anime, or a sports show, whatever, a sports genre show. And like that was dealt with pretty quickly. I mean, I definitely enjoyed that part, though. I enjoyed the idea of bending becoming a sport. I mean, thematically, that's cool too, because it's like, yeah, we've taken this spiritual martial practice and we have turned it into a sport for the consumption of the populace to bet on. That's a very like commodification of bending type idea, which Korra then participates in. So
sure, yeah, it's like football players are like the new warriors, it's that same kind of thing. We've taken the warrior class, and in this extended time of peace, we turned it into entertainment for the masses. Yeah. And look, pro bending is great. Let's talk about that for a while, because I thought this was such a fun idea. I think the game is designed in this really interesting way, and I really liked it. I enjoyed every bit of that in the show.
Yeah, I think it's pretty powerful how they managed to introduce us to a completely new sport without making it feel like it's super overburdened with exposition. I mean, you kind of learn more of the rules as the show progresses, but you never really feel like you aren't understanding the core of what's going on, which means it's a good spectator sport.
Yeah, you learn by watching, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think because they do... Like, I just got really into just about every pro bending match. And even though it's like, still kind of a kid's show, like there's a few cheesy moments. Like there's the one where Korra gets like the triple KO by getting them all in a line. And it's like, oh, come on, these guys are meant to be professionals. How's this happened? But even aside from that, there's still just every match I was like, this is just so fun to watch. And like my other side note there is I will never forgive Platinum Games. There's a Legend of Korra video game where you can play pro bending and it's only single player, and I'm never going to forgive them for that.
Yeah, that's disgusting. Why would they do that?
Yeah, what a waste of everyone's time.
Yeah, it is. It is so fun, and it is built perfectly to, like, yeah, that moment where she KOs the three of them is a little cheesy, but it's also fucking awesome because, like,
Yeah.
I think the animation there is really cool too. The way they line up, and it just pays off perfectly. Like, the whole thing is great. I loved it all, and I didn't even realize that Mako and Bolin were going to become actual characters, because I thought they were so milquetoast at first, and I was just like, oh, they're just her sports. They're just her sports friends. They're not what the show's about. And then I was like, oh no, wait, they are. Oh, okay, I guess that's fine. But no, I thought it was all great. Like it escalates to the perfect point. I mean, I even love that the final match they don't win because the other team's clearly cheating, and then it's broken up by the attack by Amon. I thought that was all great.
I want to touch on that. The Grand Championship, because I think this is a point that really is something that I think sets Legend of Korra above The Last Airbender in some ways, which is that the plot in Legend of Korra just feels more intricate and more, I guess intricate is the best word. Things like the fact that the Wolfbats have paid off the ref, or maybe it's Amon has paid off the ref so that the Wolfbats win, and then he takes away their bending because he's not ready to face Korra yet. Like, all these weird things that just lead to this very intricate plot of Amon kind of setting up his pretty perfect plan for taking over the city.
Yeah.
And it all unfolds so methodically and delightfully. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, I think Emmeline is a great villain, actually. I don't have any complaints there. In fact, yeah, I think I will grant that he feels like more of a real character than Firelord Ozai.
So you couldn't even remember his name. That's how.
Because Ozai was just I'm the bad man who will take over the world, and this guy he's got a revenge thing. He's got a very interesting backstory. He's got a clever and I don't want to use the word intricate again. he's got a plot that feels clever and actually, relies on a lot of different aspects of the setting to work.
Yeah.
Well, and he's so clever. Yeah. Like so many of the things, like the bit when the Wolfbats win and he just gets to go up there and say, hey, everyone's, celebrating like clear scumbags and cheaters. Like, this is fucked. And you're like, that's a good point, Amon.
Yeah.
But he must have set that up. I'm so sure that Amon paid off the ref explicitly to make that perfect point that, oh, you're all cheering these people who are bullies and have clearly cheated. Like, so perfect.
I can see that. The bit where he captures Korra, and I think it's like episode 4, and he actually sort of gives the whole classic evil villain monologue of, oh no, I can't kill you yet. I have plans for you later. And then he actually explains kind of why that is, and it's one of the first times ever where I've been like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like he's sort of like, if I kill you now, the whole rest of the world will come after me. Like, I need to be in a better position before I take down the Avatar.
Yeah.
And I was just like, that makes sense. Like, that it's very rare that this happens. And that's one of the bits where I think the show just really elevates itself for me, where I'm just like, I love how much sense both like the villain makes in this season.
Yeah, well, and I loved that moment had actual consequences too, because the entire next episode is Korra wrestling with the sheer terror she feels because she was like
powerless.
Well, actually, that's the episode where she's dealing with it, right? Because like she watches him take away someone else's bending, and she's terrified. She's absolutely like to the point where she's just like, no, I'm just gonna do my airbending. That's all I want to do now. And it's really fascinating that the show explores that the concept of just the fear of losing the one thing that she cares the most about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't want to psychoanalyze the creators too much, but I feel like they may have fallen in love with Aemon, and like, because like I've had this happen where you create like you're creating a story that has a complex plot with a villain who's a chess master, and then you get so down the rabbit hole of creating this convoluted plot and this and all of the things this villain has thought through, that you sort of almost come to wish that you could just tell the story of the villain. But they didn't have that option here, and so they had to have some. I mean, that's what, like, isn't Amon's story is more interesting than anyone else's. he's the most interesting character of this season.
Yeah, I mean, the episode where we learn his backstory is one of the best ones of the season, I think. I thought that was just a fascinating story.
Yeah, me too.
This was something that I kind of forgot as well. I remembered the plot, but going into it, I kind of expected to hate Tarlok a lot more than I did. And then he's obviously set up to be the character that you hate, but then we get to this turn where he bloodbends Korra, and I'm like freaking out at this point because it's genuinely so terrifying. And then his little showdown with Amon where he bloodbends Amon, and Amon just shrugs it off and keeps walking towards him. It's like straight out of a horror movie. I love it.
Yeah,
Amon is a classic villain.
Yeah.
For a hot minute there, I thought he was going to end up being Amon, and then they show up in the same scene, and I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah. You're definitely meant to think that early in the first half, like because I think that was like the big theory and everything. Like it was definitely like so because Tarlok is so kind of evil and seems to be playing into Amon's hands. I think you kind of led to believe that maybe they're the same person.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean that doesn't end up being too far off in a way.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about, because as much as I've shat on the end of this season, that moment with the two of them
on the
at
boat,
the very end was like
that
touching and beautiful, like and heartbreaking.
That's killed me. I'm dead. Yes. I was like sincerely affected by that moment. I was like, oh my God, this is too sad. He even sheds a single tear, indicating that he knows that it's about to happen. I'm too sad now. I have to go lie down.
It was a beautiful moment. Like that was the show. Like I feel like that was one of the moments that they had in mind when they even started down this path. Is like they had the ending in mind, because it just culminates to that beautifully.
Yeah. Just to comment about that. Like I was reading about that moment because I was like, oh, that's such a good moment, and someone kind of clarified something to me that I hadn't even like consciously registered, which is that like the fact that the shock gloves are on the boat suggests that I'm trying to think of his real name, but
Noah Tuck.
That Noah Tuck has not really given up on his path, and so when his brother sees the shock gloves, he's like, "Oh, you're still trying to sneak these on board, so I know that you're not serious," and so that motivated his decision to do that. And I was like, "Okay, I'll buy that too.
Yeah,
that's good.
I like that. Yeah."
Something we haven't touched on, and obviously this was a strength of the original show as well, but the choreography and the fight scenes in this just kick ass. I'm not a huge fan of the giant metal tank things and the way they fit into scenes, but everything else, the battle on top of the pro bending circuit as Amon's trying to get away halfway through the season is amazing.
Yeah,
and just the metal benders in general.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, seeing these metal benders Spider-Manning around is very fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I really appreciated is, like, I think one of the things that they had to do when approaching making a sequel to the show is, are we gonna try to top ourselves? Like, what is the plan here? And they did really interesting stuff. Like, I agree that the metal bending, just like story-wise, the concept of Toph bringing metal bending to earthbenders to where more people learn it is just a really cool idea. And then the way it's executed in the story is so cool. I love the Spider-Manning around. I love how that mixed in with the other combat changed things up a little bit. I thought I'm completely in agreement that the animation is spot on here. Like it's a beautiful looking show. It moves very well. The choreography is really, really interesting. I was never dulled by any of the fights, except for maybe the monsters. But other than that, or not the tank monster,
the
things,
mechs,
yeah.
I think
I'm just not a mech person, so that's probably part of it too.
I mean, I think that at that point they were. I mean, I'm not either excusing it or condemning it or whatever. It's just like at a certain point you have to come up with a way that non-benders can fight benders, and having like a robot suit is something that just kind of makes sense, right?
I love the chi blockers so much in the choreography. Like having a bunch of Ty Lees running around, for me, is so much more appealing than the giant metal tanks.
Yeah, I think at first I didn't. At first, I sort of reacted negatively to the chi blockers being so effective, because I was like, I thought benders were supposed to be good at fighting. Why are these chi blockers are just completely manhandling them? And then after I thought about it, I was like, well, maybe this is kind of the point. Is that like the benders are not actually that good at fighting? They're good at bending. They don't really know. like they haven't actually trained in like sparring hand to hand. They the way they spar, they're like 80 feet apart shooting fireballs at each other. So I kind of reconceptualized that and was like, oh yeah, I can totally buy that if you train to be really good at this particular thing, then you could probably, assuming you could get the drop on a bender and like get in close range with them, you could pull this off.
Yeah, especially...
Also, friendly reminder that chi blocking was made illegal and bending is not.
Yeah, it's literal underground chi blocking dojo that has to be rated.
Yeah. That no comment from the show on that at all.
No,
just normal people trying to learn to defend themselves. No.
Bust them.
But it's good when Asami does it.
Of course.
Yeah,
But she doesn't chi block. She just like straight up, martial arts and then electroshock gloves people.
I guess that's because she's fighting chi blockers most of the time. But I'm just kind of using this as an excuse to segue into Asami, who's one of the characters we haven't talked about yet.
Sure.
I mean, I'm just interested to hear what you guys thought of her, because I kind of find her fantastic right from the get-go.
Yeah, I mean, I liked, like, they set her up very interestingly from the start, like as kind of an antagonist to our hero, right? Or am I thinking of the wrong character?
No, that's Asami. Kind of a romantic rival.
Yeah.
But
and also, like, all the stuff goes down with her father, and at least the first time I watched it, I was holding secret thoughts that she was going to be like a mole and betray them at the end.
I definitely thought that's where we were going with it. It seemed like, especially there's moments near the before the final confrontation with her dad that, like, we cut to her and she's like seemingly like really concerned or worried about something. I'm like, oh my God, you're gonna flip at the last minute, right? Like, you're gonna come in contact with your dad and flip to his side or something terrible. But no, it's just he's a really shitty guy, really shitty father. I think that's the end of their arc is you're a bad father.
To be fair to Asami as well, she is treated pretty badly by Marco.
Yes. Oh my God. Yes. I think it's weird that the show, like, I don't know. I had a hard time telling whose side the show was supposed to be on in this whole thing, because it seems to be like pro Korra Mako, but that means that, like, Asami's just getting fucked over.
I was just pro Asami the whole time, to be honest. Okay, so first I have to confess I forgot Asami's name. So when you were asking about her, I was like, yes, Asami. Yeah, Asami. Now that I've looked up who that is, yes, I thought she was a better character than Mako and what's his face. Like I probably cared more about her than I did about the two sports boys.
Yeah, can Asami and Korra date? Can that happen? That'd be much better.
Yeah. Dead silence.
Oh God, they're being really quiet.
No comment.
But she's cool. I mean, I think it's interesting. Like, we start her off as the rich, like, doesn't know anything person, and she becomes a lot more complicated than that.
I mean, she always seemed too good for Mako, or is it Mako? Yeah.
Yes.
I thought she was great. Yeah, she's a fun character.
I definitely, Mako just feels for most of this season kind of like the he's just kind of this flat love interest for Korra / Asami.
Yeah.
He has some moments. Like, there is the thing, he's on a date with Asami at one point. He starts to talk about, like, how he lost his parents and why he loves his scarf, and you start to get something. But there's a lot of the time where it just kind of feels like he's meant to be, like, tall, dark, and handsome.
Yeah, I think the bits where it focuses on Marco and Bolin's relationship to each other probably is their strongest their strongest times, because they actually do have quite an interesting dynamic to the two of them, with themselves, but not to anyone else.
I think my problem with that is whenever they have those, it's mostly around Korra. Whenever they're like having interactions with each other and conflict and defining their relationship a little bit more, it usually revolves around their friendship / other ships with Korra.
That's my impression. So again, I watched this in 2 big chunks, and I felt like they front loaded all of the character development for those guys in terms of their relationship with each other, their backstory, who they are, and then everything in, let's call it, the second half of the season is just love quadrangle bullshit that I don't care about, frankly. And
there's nothing wrong with a love quadrangle, right? It's just
there's nothing more.
I feel like I didn't buy any of the romance. I don't know. Like, I just didn't buy that these people were actually into each other.
I could buy that Bolin's into Korra because they actually do have chemistry, but Korra and Mako just don't work together. I don't understand it.
Yeah.
I don't know. They're horny teenagers. I mean, they're in the same room. I could see that.
Sure.
But no, I think to talk about Bolin, because I agree, and I think like the thing that frustrates me about Bolin here is I think just as a comic relief, he almost stacks up to Sokka. Like I do genuinely laugh most of the time when he does something funny, but Sokka had something more underneath that, which I think makes you connect with it a lot more, whereas Bolin just doesn't have that at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Like, yeah,
that's fair.
It's almost like Bolin is too earnestly good. like Sokka had like self-doubt and struggle and and
he was a bit of he didn't like women too much at the beginning.
Yeah.
or at least in his very Sokka kind of way.
He was a 13-year-old boy, and he had to come to grips with reality. But it's like Bolin is almost like an older, more mature Sokka, and you're like, okay, cool, but where do we go from here? And the answer is, in this season, nowhere, apparently.
Nowhere. Yeah, that's fair. Got it. See, this is this is the thing that's like, I feel like we're being super critical. I really loved the show. I really did.
Well, if we feel like we're being too critical, maybe let's turn our gaze over to Tenzin over there standing in the corner, who is an incredible character. And I think that the role Tenzin plays in this show is kind of similar to the role Iroh played in The Last Airbender, except for the good team instead of for mostly the bad team, I guess.
Yeah, that's fair.
And man, Tenzin really stacks up. Like, Iroh obviously is a character who's kind of on his pedestal and can never be knocked off, but Tenzin is kind of real in a way that Iroh wasn't for a lot of the show. And I absolutely fell in love with him over the course of this season.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I really liked him. I loved his relationship with his family. We haven't talked about any of the little kids, but I love all, especially the little bald son. I love so much Milo. Just like, it's like the most juvenile, ridiculous humor, and I was like, "Yep, love it."
The highlight of the season, of course, is when he fart bends on one of the equals to the other.
Yep,
it's so stupid, but I couldn't not laugh at it.
I wish I could say I was mature enough to find that just uncouth, but I was laughing my ass off.
Actually, I really like that moment where the 3 airbending kids come out to help Lin, and because everyone's kind of telling them, oh, we've got to protect the kids, and it's sort of not until that scene and you see Jinora do some quite powerful airbending. I was like, actually, I think she's older than Aang was at the point where he saved the world. Like, just because the show has aged up, I'd kind of like brought down the kids in my mind, and then watching them actually be powerful, I was like, actually, these kids are kind of the age of half the characters in the original show, and we put them through a fair bit.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, they were just going off on their own on adventures. I think it's amazing. I think it's amazing how much perspective changes you in that, because you are of the perspective of the adults and the older teenagers a lot more in this show. So you look down on them as children because that's your point of view in the show. So, but you're absolutely right. Hey, but back to Tenzin. We can talk about
right. So, I mean, to connect those two things, like, you really more empathize with Tenzin and his desire to try to keep his family safe, even though it's a bit overprotective considering all the facts of the situation. But like he has this struggle. I mean, he definitely has a lot more struggle and internal conflict and doubt than Iroh ever had, and in different ways too, like in multiple ways. Like, is he going to be able to be this leader of the Airbenders? Is he going to be able to be an adequate tutor for Korra? And like he especially when he feels very frustrated by her and he feels like it's not working, you know. I thought those were some of the more some of the parts of the show that worked the best for me in terms of like the drama was when he's trying to teach her and it's like their personalities just clash so horribly. You're like, this is so realistic, right?
Yeah, I mean, plus just his continuing struggles with the city. I mean, you're watching this man watch the thing that his father created collapse, and like he's I think we talked about this at the very beginning. This idea of living up or being in the shadow of Aang, and here's this guy who is on the council, is the son of the Avatar, and he is literally not as powerful as him, like by design. His father was the Avatar, he's just an Airbender, and so it's like he can't possibly ever live up to his father, but he feels a responsibility to the thing he created. That's the city. He's put himself on the city, and I think one of the most powerful moments in the show for me was when he is riding away, when they are leaving the city behind, basically saying, "We failed. We have to run and hide." And it's so tragic because you see the failure. Like you see just this feeling of, I have betrayed everything or failed everything that my father worked so hard to create. And I thought it was wonderful.
Well, yeah, he's juggling recreating the Air Nation, trying to keep Republic City from killing itself, and also just dealing with the fact that he's Aang's sort of son, and in particular, you sort of assume as the airbending son, probably the one who got like the most face time with Aang, as Aang tried to make him into an airbender. So yeah, it's so fascinating to watch someone who is like, seems like a very capable guy, but has so many different huge weights on his shoulders.
Yeah. That was it's interesting because there's always going to be the word fan service floating around when you have like a sequel to a beloved thing, right? And I felt like nothing in this show did feel like fan service to me. Like it was like even when we had Zuko's grandson Iroh show up.
I was just going to mention, I think that's the one thing to me that is a little bit too much.
See, this is my segue, is that I love that. So therefore it's not fan service.
No, I'm the same. I was unashamedly like, as soon as they introduce someone who has the same voice actor as Zuko, and it's such a distinct voice, and it's just like, oh, very well, General Iroh. And I was just sort of like, yep, I'm down for this.
Squee, yes, right.
Yeah, except I guess because the same voice actor, they were just like, we don't need to characterize this guy, right? It's Zuko. Exactly. You know it's Zuko, right? So they just didn't. Well, like, he's just there, and you're just like, who is this person?
I mean,
what? And he just instantly integrates with the whole crew. Like, Korra just sort of picks him up out of the water, and then he's just sort of part of the team instantly. And I was just sort of like, okay, I'm okay with this.
Yeah, right. I mean, he's a terrible military commander. Well, that's for sure.
He really doesn't do very well, does he?
No,
he just leads his entire fleet into destruction.
And then sends off a message to the other half that is immediately intercepted.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I mean, talk about following in your grandfather's footsteps. Zuko didn't really nail it at the start either.
True. At least he doesn't have half his face burned.
No, he's just inexperienced, y'all. He'll get better. I believe in him.
He can fly with fire.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
It's been peacetime for 70 years, so presumably he hasn't had that much war to actually do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's when you were talking, Matt, about how effective the non-benders are. I think that's part of it too, is this idea that they've lived in peace for so long that like there's some bender cops. Like, how often do the normal, just everyday benders hanging out in Republic City actually have to fight trained people? Probably not very often at all. I mean, to the point where there is this huge giant army and fleet, but they're not at the city. They're just doing whatever. I don't know what they're doing, but I just don't think anyone in this world really needs fight very often, and so they're just not used to it.
Yeah.
And
well, it reminds me very much of like literal World War One era where they were making up uses for these new technologies as the war progressed. Like they were like, what if we dropped a bomb out of one of these flying machines? Like that's the level of like theory that we're at, right? Like just like you're saying, right? Like they haven't really tested how like the old school bending style warfare is going to interact with the new technology, much less kept their bending sharp in the first place. So it all makes a lot of sense to me, practically.
Yeah, I mean, just the whole technological aspect of the world. I know we've touched on it already, but I just found it so fascinating because most of the technology we see in this season is stuff seeds that were planted in the 100-Year War in the original show. And it kind of feels like, in this time of peace, they've managed to turn technological improvements that were created for wartime into society. And I actually think that it's just like a really interesting and realistic idea to, like, I think you sort of see that, like there were, technological stuff being brought into civilian life after like the world wars in real life as well.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like what happens when you take these improvements that were made for the military and bring them into real life.
Yeah. I love that. And this might be a good time to talk about the music a little bit, because I think one of the things that the music does in this show is tie that idea together. Like a lot of what the show is to me is this idea of taking like the very old traditional, let's call them Eastern lifestyle and styles, and tying it into this modern 1920s-ish West style. And I think the music does such a great job of selling that general motif, because like there's this very kind of traditional Asian music mixed in sometimes very abruptly with this 20s like weird kind of just jazzy type of music. And like it's so fascinating to me, because the first time I heard it, I was like, I think the first time I heard it was when I think it was the chase in the city in the first episode when Korra's chasing him around, and there's this music comes up, and you're just like, whoa, this is really off-putting. Like, this is very different. And then over time you kind of realize what it's doing. It's taking these two things, and it's taking these two styles and kind of smashing them into each other in very interesting ways, which is what I think a lot of at least the early parts of this season were doing, is taking these concepts. Like Korra grew up in the middle of nowhere in Southern Water Tribe, right? Yeah. Like you guys said, a very rural area, a very traditional area where it's all about the traditions of bending and this traditional way of life. And then she's been thrust into the city, and I love how the musical motifs match that. I mean, both the types of music are beautiful in their own right, but the meshing and mashing together was very fascinating to me.
Yeah, I wish I'd paid more attention to that now that you're mentioning it. But I did not, actually.
I fairly regularly go back and listen to music from Korra, and I almost never do that for The Last Airbender, which is interesting, because I don't think The Last Airbender had bad music. The music in Korra is so excellent. And I think it really does help sell the world and makes the world feel cohesive in a way that...
Yeah.
Like, if you take a step back and look at the setting of this show, it's... Okay, there's people who can shoot magical elements, but then there's also like cars and stuff, which is like, 1920s. But then there's also like mecha tanks, which aren't 1920s. So it's this weird steampunk, magical, weird vibe that only really works somehow as a cohesive unit. And I think a large part of that is the music kind of making this world feel more alive.
Yeah, 100%. And also the amazing Last Time on Korra announcement guy who's like the 1920s radio announcer. I loved every single one of those. I usually don't pay attention to the Last Time on things, and it's so great.
Genius.
I actually had forgotten that was like a thing they did, and I remember I went through this the first time I watched the show, which is when it happens in episode 2. I thought it was meant to be an in-universe television like program, and so I was like watching it as if it's part of the episode, and then it's just sort of like, and it cuts to the actual episode, and I was like, oh yeah, of course, that's the previously on. So I fell for it twice.
Yeah. The only thing I didn't like was I felt like the opening was less interesting. Like,
it's definitely less iconic.
The fire, like that we're going through the elements, and then like I felt like Katara's speech was way better than I even forget what Tenzin says here. It's just like that's her. Start the show.
Yeah. It's basically only the Avatar can bend all the elements and unite the world. I think that's essentially it.
Boring.
It's very short.
And it's not plot relevant either, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's not actually... Korra bending all 4 elements is not super relevant to the plot of this show.
She can't even do it for most of the season.
Actually, that's a good point, because I think one of the big differences in this show is there is not, at least not yet, an overarching plot, right? I mean, like, in Avatar, there was almost from the beginning an end goal, right? Like the start of the show, the Fire Nation had taken over the world. We didn't quite learn about the comet yet, but we had this idea that the end goal of the show is to defeat the Fire Nation and bring balance back to the world, basically. And Korra does not have that. There is no, and I'm not saying there won't be, but at least through the first season, there is no overarching show plot. And I'm not saying there has to be, but it is unique in that regard, right? It is, and I think it's for that reason that the show does get to be a little bit more intricate in its plotting, because it does not have this finish line, this known finish line. It is just exploring different ideas, and it's allowed to explore those ideas in a little bit more intricate manner. And I like that. I would like to see like where it's gonna go, because like it is a weird thing finishing a season of a show and just being like, okay, I have no idea what they're going to do next. None at all.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you have this hint that it's like, okay, she's going to have to be more of a spiritual leader.
Right.
It's going to have to do with winning hearts and minds rather than kicking a bad guy's ass. And that sounds just about like the speed we're going. Like it's a more mature show. So I kind of hope they go that direction anyway.
Yeah, and I think
I guess that's just what's frustrating for me about the way this season ends, where she just can suddenly talk to Aang and enter the Avatar state, because it's sort of like we open the show with this idea of she is an Avatar who lacks the spiritual connection so far. She moves to a city that seems to have more or left the spiritual side to the world behind.
Yeah.
And Amon kind of capitalizes on that. Something we haven't mentioned is that before you learn Amon's a bloodbender, his explanation is that the spirits gave him the power to take away bending in much the same way Aang was given the ability to do that, because the spirits have decided that bending is no longer needed.
Yeah.
And there's these really interesting implications to how this world has lost its connection with the spiritual side of itself. And then the ending is just sort of like, okay, here we go, Korra, here's your spiritual side.
Yeah.
Right, because I agree with what Matt was saying, that the plot moving forward is going to be being the spiritual leader that the world needs, a world that has modernized to a point where it's kind of lost that core. But I totally agree with you that if that's where they want to go with the show as a whole, then it's such a perfect setup that just didn't explore it enough. It didn't go into that. It didn't wrestle with this idea enough. In this first season, if now she's achieved that, right? If now she is the spiritual leader now, and now she's gonna have to convince the rest of the world. Well, that's key to the whole plot, and you needed to explore how she gets her spirit mojo back.
I mean, she doesn't.
Yeah.
I mean, like, there's no dramatized way in which she has now formed a connection with her spiritual side. She just got pretty sad because she lost her bending. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I hope they like revisit that. I'm saying a lot of statements that sound like I really hope that they do this certain direction, and I'm like, I don't know. They could do something better, right? Like they could surprise me and it's just like, oh no, we didn't do that thing because we had a better idea, and that would be fine too.
Yeah,
but
I hope it ties in, thematically and logically to what they've set up, because I like this idea of, oh, the world has kind of lost its spiritual way is a very interesting thing to explore via the Avatar, because that's the thing. Like, the Avatar is not just supposed to be this powerful weapon that kills everything. It is supposed to be the world's connection to the spirit realm.
Right.
And to really explore that would be really, really interesting.
Yeah, a lot of the stories of like what the old avatars would do from Last Airbender were like protecting people from natural disasters, or like, you know, protecting people from a warlord, and basically dispensing justice. Things where it's a combination of spirituality and being the protector of the people, right? And and if and maybe like the argument or the idea that you and I at least are going for, since we don't know what's going to happen, is like it would be cool if what they needed protection from this time was like a disconnection from their past rather than some overt physical threat. Although then I don't know where your martial arts TV show is going to get its punching from, but I would be excited to see something like that anyway.
Yeah, they'll find a way to punch the spirit.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
Yeah, they'll punch modernity.
There you go.
Okay.
Has to be like machine bending, right? Where they just break all the machines.
But that's basically metal bending, isn't it?
Okay, touche. She did completely destroy those Zeppelins. I just said she because I forgot the name of the character, but maybe we should talk about her because it's Lin Beifong. She's cool, right?
She was pretty cool. I liked her.
She's so Toph, but she's also not. I really love her as the daughter of Toph because she's got kind of the no shits attitude of Toph, but she's a much angrier person. And I really like how that she feels like an extension of Toph's character. Like I think it's a really interesting way to explore that idea.
And she uses her feet. She uses her feet slam echolocate. That was a cool touch.
She's a lot more rules abiding than Toph as well,
Yes.
which is the kind of evolution of her character into being the police.
Yeah, I like that.
I mean, it's interesting because that's almost not the case. She spends more of the season being a vigilante than she does. But like one of the things that happens in like I think episode 7 is she's like, I need to stop them on my own way outside the law, and so she basically decides that her way is the way that is not the law, which is a crazy thing for your police chief to be saying.
Well, but the current police chief is so obviously corrupt and ineffective that I kind of like. She's basically just continuing being the police chief.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I thought she got her bending taken away, and then the show said, "Just kidding, all that's back."
Yeah.
So the interesting thing is, and the show didn't show it, so I'm interested to hear everyone's opinion. Do you give the bending back to the crime lords and the other terrible people that Amon took it from?
Oh, no.
There was some interesting discussion in the Discord about the nature of being able to take away bending as like a punishment. I think that was like yeah, if you catch this crime lord and you know that bloodbenders can take away bending, just do that to him.
Yeah, or especially because we saw Aang use it as a punishment on Yakone, but the way the scene's framed, it very much gives you this idea of that's absolutely his last resort.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just interesting if you've had someone like Amon go rogue and do it. Well, do you give it back to people who are clearly using it for terrible things?
That's a good question. I think you're right that the way the show frames that power is of a last resort. I definitely think Aang doesn't even really want to have to do it, but he recognizes that he does. So yeah, I don't know. I don't think you would probably ever see Korra like jumping around the city, taking powers away from every person that uses it bad. But I do think like once it's been taken away, like to go the extra step and say, no, here you go, here's your power again, please go free. I don't know about that either. That might be a bridge too far. But it does seem like it's set up as like it is a core part of who they are as a human being, right? So it is literally ripping a part of them out of them.
I mean, that is something I'd love to see explored, is this idea of what does bending mean to them? Like, if you took someone like Lin and you take her bending away, what does that mean for her? Like, yeah. I agree. It's a shame she got it back because it'd be very interesting to explore. Is it something that's very core to them, or is it just this privilege that they were born with that they're just attached to?
Yeah, absolutely. That would have been really interesting. And unfortunately, Nickelodeon made us sitcom the entire season back to where everything was beforehand.
Yeah, so. Everyone hugs the end.
Yeah. Except for the two people that blew themselves up on a speedboat.
Oh my God. Yeah, at least
parachutes in that scene.
Yeah, at least they did that. Like, that was powerful. Like, just imagine if they had been able to do that kind of thing. more.
It feels like, and again, this is totally speculation, but it feels like that is the kind of thing that they probably did get pushback on a little bit. And it seems like something that I bet they fought for, because like we talked about earlier, it seems like this is the finish line they always had in mind for these two characters. And it's key to what they were doing with them. So
worth it if they did. It's a great moment.
Absolutely. Maybe they to get that, they had to relent on Korra stuff. Maybe, I don't know. It's all deals and trade-offs.
Yeah, I guess. It's a shame. Shame it has to be that way, because like you'd think that these people would have earned a little bit of leeway after making Last Airbender.
Yeah, you would, wouldn't you? I mean, how popular? Like, I know it's like acclaimed and everyone that's watched it loved it, but was it like a hugely popular show? I don't even know.
I think it was, and I'm sure we'll get comments, especially in our Discord, from people who know this stuff better than I do. But I think Nickelodeon gets the majority of their money from their shows, not actually from cable subscriptions or anything, but from selling merchandise. And I think because Avatar was aimed at a slightly older audience than most of their shows, I think it didn't sell as well as some of their others. Like, you know, something like SpongeBob, there's so much SpongeBob stuff everywhere. And I don't think Avatar quite made them the same amount of money in that way. So I think they might have been trying something different here with Korra, and you know, when you have your entire business model built around cute cartoons that sell merchandise, and you're trying something different, there's always going to kind of be a bit of a corporate, conflict there when you're going against what it is that is your bread and butter. Sure.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, we got to sell those parachutes.
Okay, anything else anyone wanted to talk about before we wrap up? I liked the touch where future Zuko crashes the plane into the mask that's covering Avatar Aang's statue.
Oh, that was great.
Thought that was perfect.
I love that. Future Zuko.
I forgot his name.
It's Iroh. It's easy to remember.
Yeah, they just reused the character's name.
Because Iroh is an old man who really likes tea. It's not this
service.
little kid.
It's not fan service.
I mean, the most unrealistic part about this kid being named Iroh is that Zuko didn't already do that with one of his children.
Yeah, what's Zuko's son's name? Do we know that?
It's got to be Aang.
No, I refuse to believe it. I'm looking this up. I'm very curious.
I think it's barely touched on the show. I think Zuko actually has 2 daughters, so he probably just didn't get the opportunity to use it. But I can't.
That would be the only way I'd believe it.
Okay. I'm now struggling with the fact that I have to remind myself that Zuko is not with Katara, actually.
Yeah, I was not shocked by the fact that we learned that not only did they finish Avatar: The Last Airbender getting together, but got married and had children. Like, I wasn't shocked, but I was just like, really?
I think it's the keep it simple.
I'm sure
premise
you're right.
There.
Plus, then we get to see Katara again.
Yeah, and I do like those ones. I think that one of my favorite moments in the show is actually that bit in the first episode where Jinora goes up to Katara and is like, "Whatever happened to Zuko's mum?" And just as Katara starts talking, they get interrupted, and it's just whatever the opposite of fan service is, fan trolling, and it's a great moment.
These guys like to do that a lot with Avatar, right? Like they did that a bunch of times in The Last Airbender as well.
That's great. I don't think I noticed that somehow. Yeah, that's great.
Cool. Anything else?
No, I don't think I have anything. Just good show.
Yeah, it was a good show. I enjoyed it. I hope we get to do episodes on future seasons someday. Patrons. All right, that's all we had for you guys this week. If you want to let us know what you thought of season 1 of The Legend of Korra, you can reach out to us via email at doofmedia@gmail.com or over on our Twitter account at doofmedia. And Elliot, Reuben, thank you guys again so much for coming. Why don't you plug your stuff before we do the rest of the outro? Who are you? Where do you come from? What do you do?
So we're from Australia. We have two shows that are also on the excellent Doof Media network. One is Media M.D, where each fortnight we discuss a piece of media that one of us hasn't seen before and the other one really loves. And so it's a great way to explore some of the media, TV shows, movies, books, that kind of stuff that we really like.
Yeah, and that's also a great way to get your feelings really, really hurt when you don't like New Girl.
I mean, look, it's a flawed show. Let's just say that. And the other show we do is Deep Impact, which is a completely original premise where we dive into a story chapter by chapter, a Wild Boar story. It's a cool premise that we came up with. It's very original. And if you want to check either of those out, you can find them on doofmedia.com.
Wow.
Cool.
Sounds really interesting. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
I'll definitely have to check it out.
So yeah, if you're not already subscribed to this podcast, we encourage you to do so and ensure you never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else podcasts can be found.
Yeah, and you can find all of our shows, including those great shows by Reuben and Elliot, over at our website, doofmedia.com. And if you like those shows, their shows, our show, any of our shows, and want to support us, you can become a patron of Doof Media. Head on over to patreon.com/doofmedia and pledge $1 a month or whatever else you can afford to help ensure we keep growing and keep making new stuff. And you can make us keep watching The Legend of Korra as well. This episode right here only exists thanks to the wonderful generosity of our patron, Shelby. Shelby, thank you so much for making us watch the show. And hopefully some fellow patrons will make us watch the rest of it.
I hope I wasn't too mean to it, Shelby. I did enjoy it.
I enjoyed it a whole bunch.
Yeah. Also, please consider rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. Every review helps us get more exposure and introduces new people to the content that we make here.
All right, everyone, we're recording this one like way far in the past. I don't think this is coming out for 2 weeks, so I don't remember what is next week, quote unquote, on the calendar. But there's going to be a show, and it's going to be good, and we'll see you then.
My name is Doof, and you'll do what I say. My name is Doof, and you'll do what I say.